Today is International Women's Day, and here it's a massive event and indeed a public holiday, so it's well worth doing an episode about. It's celebrated with some enthusiasm in most of the ex-USSR countries, as well as some of their fraternal countries like Angola, Cuba and Vietnam. I have a Soviet stamp here from 1967 supporting the day, so it's certainly not a new celebration. In fact, it's been acknowledged in this part of the world ever since the Bolsheviks grabbed power over 100 years ago. Here are some stamps commemorating women. The bottom one shows Valentina Tereshkova, who left Earth to go into space in the 1960s, at the time when many Western women still hadn't left the kitchen. The promotion of Soviet women, in all honesty, was more to do with economic and practical reasons than anything else. Indeed, after the Second World War, the Soviet working population had more women than men, as did the population as a whole, due to the millions of men who lost their lives in the war. Soviet propaganda would always use their example of women in the workplace to demonstrate that communism was more progressive than the chauvinistic capitalism. This is of course not to say that Western women were not providing vital contribution to the workforce. This was especially true during the war. In fact, my very own grandmother can be seen here on the front cover of a book about the invaluable contribution by British women which helped defeat Nazism. Indeed, my nan, the taller woman on the right, and her co-worker were doing a job that had never been done by women before, as it had been considered too physically demanding. They were only 19 years of age as well. Let's come back to the present day and focus a little bit more on International Women's Day. As a Westerner here, it can be difficult to kind of make sense of it. Indeed, I'd never actually heard of it until I started coming to this part of the world. You might think that it's got to do with women's equality and things like that, and it probably would do if it was widely celebrated in the West. But here, it's kind of not really anything to do with that at all. It doesn't really seem to have any political connotations or anything. What was interesting was earlier when I popped out into the restaurant to grab a coffee, there was a group of women and they were reading old Russian literature and poetry, which was focusing on the beauty of women. And then when I came back here, I went on Google to do something, and I noticed that on Google's front page, they had a little video or something to do with it, and it was completely different. It was more focusing on women's rights and equality. So two completely different approaches there. And like I said, this celebration can be a little bit difficult to fully understand. Anyway, enough of me speculating. Why don't we go and have a little chat with a local woman? Milena, thanks for joining us. Happy March the 8th, Women's Day. And what does it mean to you, this holiday? Is it just a bit of tradition, a bit of fun, or does it have any other kind of meaning?
So it has a really big meaning for women in Kyrgyzstan as well. It's about our rights to live our proper full life, and it's about our choice, maybe. And it means a lot for us. We are really happy to celebrate it every year.
Is there anything holding you back as a woman in Kyrgyzstan?
I could do everything I want, and even my profession, my career that I chose, the choice was made by me. Soon I will become a programmer. My father, he knew that when we started programming, there are mostly men in my group, right?
It's a male-dominated profession normally, isn't it?
But he was like, it's profession of future, and I'm really glad that you are interested in this. So go.
That's great.
Go ahead. the first reaction it was, "You're a girl, isn't it hard for you?"
I've heard this before, that for some reason programmers are supposed to be more, it's a job more suited to the male brain. I don't know if there's any science behind it or if it's complete nonsense. Probably nonsense.
There's nothing to be made that I'm studying programming. Like, I can do things, I can study math as well as men.
The Kyrgyz Republic is actually a Islamic country, albeit a very liberal one, but it's very unusual to see girls having their hair covered or anything.
Well, since Kyrgyzstan is a modern and democratic country, we all have a choice, like what we want to cover or we don't, and it's totally up to you. In some really, really Islamic families, it's rule that your daughter should cover you.
Yes, some girls I've seen wear it, but I'd say a minority, quite a small minority.
But mostly it's up to us.
Yeah, great. And finally, Milena, Kyrgyzstan is kind of at a crossroads. Yes, it's located in Central Asia, but of course last century it was part of the Soviet Union and has influence from Russia and no doubt other places. So would you consider yourself, and do Kyrgyz women generally consider themselves to be Central Asian women, Eastern women, or more Western women even? What would you say?
I would consider myself a Central Asian woman, as who is keeping the traditions and really appreciating them and trying to stay a really Kyrgyz girl, but a bit with Western viewpoints. From West, we learn to fight for our rights. Before you would stay at home, you would do this home stuff, and that would be your life, that would be your life. And now women, they travel, they work, they make their career, and they self-realize, and I think women now enjoy their life more than 20 years ago.
Even just 20 years ago? I was thinking like 100 years ago, but you're saying
even 20 years ago, it was different.
Okay, great. Wow. Okay then. So Milena, thanks so much for having a chat with us today.